Have you ever looked at a massive, multi-billion-dollar corporation and wondered who truly holds the day-to-day power? Is it the people who own the stock? Is it that board of directors you're always hearing about in the news? Or is it the executives up in the C-suite making those tactical, day-to-day decisions? It's a genuinely fascinating question, and the answer actually lies in this incredibly delicate, high-stakes balancing act of power, strategy, and oversight.
Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going to completely demystify these corporate power dynamics. We're breaking down the entire corporate ecosystem, and we're really going to focus on how management operates within the larger, absolutely crucial framework of corporate governance. By the time we wrap up, you are going to have a crystal clear understanding of who steers the ship, who watches the radar, and who ultimately owns the cargo. Okay, let's dive right into this. Here is our roadmap for today. We'll start by defining corporate governance, identify its three principal pillars, zoom in on management's strategic role, look at how they move from planning to execution, and finally explore the accountability loop.
All right, part one, defining corporate governance. Before we can figure out who holds the power, we really need to understand the overarching rules of the game. So back in 1992, the Cadbury Report gave us this foundational definition. It states that corporate governance is the system by which businesses are directed and controlled. And actually, a really fun fact here, the root of the word governance comes from the Latin verb gubernare, which literally translates to steer. So corporate governance isn't just some boring corporate red tape. It is the exact framework of rules and practices that guides a business toward its goals without, running aground. To keep that ship stable, good corporate governance rests on three specific pillars: transparency, accountability, and fairness. You see, a corporation doesn't just serve one single master. It's a juggling act. It has to balance the needs of various stakeholders, from local communities right down to the suppliers. But to maintain commercial integrity and actually attract investors, a company absolutely must prove it is transparent, accountable, and fair in how it operates.
Moving on to part two, the three principal pillars. We know what the system is, but who actually makes up this system?
The sources explicitly identify three primary groups that make up corporate governance. Think of it kind of like a mini government with its own checks and balances. First up, the shareholders. They're the owners who invest the capital, making them a lot like the citizens or voters. Next, we have the board of directors. They're elected by the shareholders, and their whole job is oversight and high-level strategy. So they're your legislature. Finally, you have management. The CEO, the CFO, the top execs, selected by the board to run daily operations, they represent the executive branch. This whole interacting structure dictates who has what rights, and it entirely determines the direction of the company.
Which brings us to part three, management's strategic role. Let's really zoom in on that executive branch now and see what kind of power they actually wield.
Now, this is absolutely crucial. To really understand management, you have to get this concept, the separation of ownership from control. In a giant corporation, the folks who own the company, the shareholders, are not the ones running it. This creates what we call a principal-agent relationship. The shareholders are the principals. They delegate their decision-making rights to management, who act as their agents. So management is essentially hired to build and navigate on behalf of the owners. But because management has all that daily control, a massive part of corporate governance is just making sure these agents don't start using the company's resources to satisfy their own personal goals.
And let's be super clear here. Management isn't just, pushing paper and managing employee schedules. Senior executives formulate the really high-level corporate strategies. As our sources point out, corporate strategy addresses this huge foundational question: what businesses or industries should the firm compete in? For instance, if a major fast food chain suddenly decides they're going to start manufacturing kitchen equipment, well, that's a corporate-level diversification strategy cooked up by the CEO and management. They decide the entire portfolio of businesses the company operates in. That is a ton of strategic power.
Okay, part four, from planning to execution. Once top management formulates this grand vision, how do they actually bring it to life?
Now, what's really interesting here is the intense balancing act management has to perform during strategic planning. They're constantly scanning two completely different worlds. On one side, the external environment, the economy, crazy new tech, shifting laws, and aggressive competitors. On the other side, their own internal environment, their human resources, cash flow, and company culture. A brilliant strategy on paper will literally just crash and burn if management doesn't properly align their internal capabilities with those external market opportunities. So, how do they translate all of that into action?
Well, the sources outline a very specific four-step sequence. First, they have to institutionalize the strategy, meaning they have to actively champion it so it doesn't get derailed by internal resistance. Second, they create the operating plans, which are the daily actions for every single department. Third, they allocate resources, basically putting the budget where their mouth is. And fourth, they physically build the organizational structure, setting up the teams and reporting lines needed to get the work done. And here's the kicker. If management drops the ball on even one of these four steps, the strategy fails.
And that leads us perfectly into our final section, Part 5, the accountability loop. Management has all this incredible power to plan and execute, so how on earth do we make sure they do it honestly?
This is exactly where the board of directors steps back into the spotlight as the ultimate check on management's power. The board isn't down in the trenches running daily operations, but they have some serious oversight duties. They have the power to hire and, way more importantly, fire the CEO. They handle executive compensation, making sure management's pay is actually tied to delivering value for the shareholders. They evaluate strategic leadership, and they strictly oversee financial reporting to prevent fraud. Basically, the board ensures the agents are actually serving the principals.
I love this quote from the sources because it just hits the nail on the head regarding why this whole ecosystem matters. Poor corporate governance equals poor decisions, which equals poor long-term performance. If the board gets lazy and acts like a rubber stamp, or if management builds a toxic culture that ignores reality, that accountability loop completely shatters. And when it shatters, the entire company suffers. Good governance isn't just about ticking compliance boxes. It's literally the engine of a company's financial and strategic success.
So, I'm going to leave you with a question to chew on. If you own stock, whether you're day trading individual shares or just contributing to a 401k, who is really looking out for your money? Is it the management team grinding out the daily vision, or is it the board of directors keeping them in check? Next time you see a massive corporate headline, look right past the brand name and ask yourself, how healthy is their corporate ecosystem? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. I really hope this helped you see the corporate world in a totally different light. Keep learning, and I'll catch you next time.